The blade came within 3 inches of my face. I still hear the whistle of metal slicing through the air. Still feel the rush of cold against my cheek where the sword passed. That moment, standing on my own front porch in a sundress and flip-flops, I understood something fundamental had broken in this neighborhood, and I was the only one willing to fix it. My name is Mara Calloway and I live at 14 Birchwood Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac in the Sycamore Ridge HOA community of suburban Ohio. I am a 34-year-old physical therapist, a single mother to my 7-year-old daughter Lily, and until 18 months ago, I believed neighbors were supposed to look out for each other. Sycamore Ridge looked like a dream when I bought this house: manicured lawns, brick mailboxes, and a neighborhood newsletter with recipes and Easter egg hunt announcements. What I did not see, hidden beneath all that suburban polish, was the iron fist of Renard Kellner, HOA board president, who ran this community like a petty tyrant wearing a polo shirt. Everyone called him Ken to his face, but behind closed doors, we all called him Karen, because he embodied every trait of someone drunk on microscopic authority. Karen's Karen energy transcended gender. He was the neighborhood's master complainer, rule-cider and bully, armed with a 3-ring binder of CC and RS he'd memorized like scripture. The first time I met him, he stood on my doorstep 48 hours after I moved in, clipboard in hand, to inform me that my welcome mat was 0.4 inches outside the approved entryway zone. I laughed, assuming it was a joke. It was not. He issued a formal written warning, reference number HOA 2023-0047, citing Section 4.2b of the Sycamore Ridge Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. I pulled in the mat, told myself to stay calm, and went back to unpacking boxes. That was my first mistake, letting him think compliance meant surrender. Over the following 6 months, Karen issued me 11 warnings, 2 about the shade of my window boxes, quote, not within the pre-approved terracotta spectrum. 3 about my trash bins being visible from the street before 6 a.m. on collection day, and 1, unforgettably, about the sound of Lily's laughter during a birthday party exceeding what he deemed reasonable outdoor noise levels, at 3:15 on a Saturday afternoon. My neighbor across the street, Alana Reyes, knocked on my door the evening after that last warning. Alana was 62, retired, originally from Puerto Rico, and had lived in Sycamore Ridge for 14 years, long enough to have watched Karen destroy 3 other families before me. Mija, she said, standing in my kitchen with a plate of plantains. He doesn't stop unless you make him stop. And you have to be smarter than him to do it. I poured us both coffee and listened as she laid out Karen's history, the Hendersons he'd fined into selling their home, the Patels whose vegetable garden he'd declared a commercial enterprise and threatened to sue, the elderly Kowalski couple he'd harassed until their grandchildren stopped visiting. By the time Alana left that night, I wasn't just annoyed. I was doing math. I started keeping a log, nothing fancy at first, just a notes app on my phone. Time-stamped every interaction with Karen. I photographed each warning letter, each notice, each time he showed up on my property without advance notice. I read the Sycamore Ridge CC and RS cover to cover one Sunday while Lily watched Encanto for the 4th time. What I found buried in Section 11.3 stopped me cold. The HOA board was required, by their own rules, to provide 72 hours written notice before conducting any property inspection. Karen had never once given notice. He just showed up, peered through my fence slats and wrote violations. I said nothing. I kept logging. I started attending board meetings, sitting in the back row with a legal pad, taking notes in shorthand. Karen ran those meetings like a Broadway one-man show, dismissing questions, railroading votes, and once, memorably, declaring a motion out of order because the resident raising it was being emotional. The resident was Tom Brandt, a 50-year-old former Marine who had calmly asked about the reserve fund audit. Karen told him to settle down. Tom looked at me from across the room. I raised one eyebrow. He almost smiled. After that meeting, Tom and I stood in the parking lot of the community center for 40 minutes. He had his own file, 2 years of documented violations, fines he'd paid under protest, and 3 requests for financial records that had been ignored. We started comparing notes and realized Karen had been cherry-picking enforcement. The Bransons on the corner, who were friends of his, Had a rusted boat trailer parked in their driveway for 16 months with 0 violations. Meanwhile, Alana had been fined $400 because her azaleas, which had been growing there since 2009, were suddenly deemed non-approved landscaping. The picture was becoming very clear and very ugly. Then came the close. It was a Tuesday in early June, the kind of humid Ohio morning when the air feels like a warm wet towel. I had done 3 loads of laundry and, because my dryer had a heating element that was misbehaving, I hung my clothes on a small portable drying rack on my back patio, fully enclosed, not visible from the street. By noon, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Violation Notice HOA 2024-0119. Citing Section 7.1, see no resident shall display laundry, linens, or clothing articles in any outdoor area visible to neighboring properties. I walked around my own backyard. My fence was 6 feet tall. The only way anyone saw my laundry was if they were standing on something. I checked my security cameras. Yes, I had installed a full ring of them 6 months prior, casually, after a string of porch package thefts in the area. Camera 2, mounted at the corner of my garage, had captured Karen standing on a plastic step stool he'd brought himself, peering over my fence at 10:47 a.m. He had trespassed onto my side yard, used a prop to elevate himself and surveilled my private backyard without notice. I saved that footage to 3 separate cloud drives and 1 external hard drive I kept at my office. Then I paid the fine, wrote the check, smiled. The next morning I called the Sycamore Ridge HOA Management Company, Prestige Property Services, and filed a formal complaint against Karen for violating Section 11.3, the notice requirement. The woman I spoke with, a tired-sounding person named Sandra, told me board members have a certain latitude in enforcement. I asked her to put that interpretation in writing. She said she'd look into it. She never called back. I sent a certified letter to the management company the next day, formally requesting their written policy on board member property access, citing the CC&RS and Ohio Revised Code Section 5312 governing planned community associations. I had spent 3 evenings that week reading Ohio HOA law. It turns out, Ohio takes trespass seriously, even in an HOA context. 2 weeks passed. I got a form letter acknowledging receipt of my complaint. Karen, undeterred, escalated. My front flower bed, which contained yellow and purple pansies, colors I'd had since before he was even on the board, was cited as non-compliant with the approved Sycamore Ridge botanical palette. There was no such palette document in any version of the CC&RS I had ever received. I requested it in writing from the board. Karen responded personally, the palette is an administrative guideline, not subject to member review. I printed that response, slid it into my growing accordion file and labeled the tab, Exhibit H. Alana called me that Sunday. He's talking about you at the coffee hour, she said. Telling people you're a troublemaker. That you're trying to destroy the community. Good, I said. Let him talk. Mara, be careful. He's done this before. He gets people to vote against residents at the annual meeting. He's had people's homes fined into foreclosure. I looked at Lily drawing rainbows at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration. I was not going to let this man take our home. I called an attorney that Monday morning, not just any attorney, but a woman named Patricia Nguyen, who ran a small firm in Columbus specializing in HOA disputes and community association law. Patricia listened to my summary for 20 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds and then she said, "This is one of the cleaner cases I've seen. You've been building this beautifully." She agreed to take me on retainer. The number made me wince. But Alana had offered to contribute and so had Tom Brandt and so, quietly, had 4 other Sycamore Ridge residents who had started passing notes like we were in middle school. We had a coalition. We had an attorney. We had evidence. But I had not yet seen what Karen was truly capable of. It was a Saturday afternoon in late July when everything detonated. I was on my front porch, hanging a new wreath, a simple sunflower wreath, 22 inches, well within the approved door decoration guidelines I had triple-checked the night before. Karen appeared at the end of my driveway. He was not wearing his usual polo. He was wearing a bathrobe and slippers and he was holding, I'm not making this up, A ceremonial Japanese katana he apparently kept as a display piece. That wreath is not compliant, he said, pointing the sword at my front door like a medieval lord issuing a decree. I stood very still. My heart was pounding in a way I had not felt since a car accident 6 years prior. Ken, I said, keeping my voice level, you need to put that down. I am the president of this HOA and I am telling you that wreath violates section 6.4. Dimensions exceeding 20 inches. 22 inches is within guidelines, I said. And you need to step off my property. He took 2 steps up my driveway and swung the sword in a wide arc. Not at me, not exactly, but the blade swept through the air less than a yard from where I stood, and the sound of it, the actual whistle of steel, stopped the blood in my veins. My neighbor Jake Tillman, who was washing his car across the street, dropped his hose. Mrs. Kolsky, walking her terrier, froze on the sidewalk. My front doorbell camera, my porch camera and Alana's Ring doorbell across the street all captured every second of what happened next. Karen raised the sword again, stepped closer and said in a voice that was almost calm, I suggest you take that wreath down, Mrs. Calloway. And that is when I picked up my phone, dialed 911 and said, I need police at 14 Birchwood Lane. A man is threatening me with a sword on my property. The dispatcher's voice was steady. I kept mine steady too. I backed through my front door and locked it. Karen stood on my porch for another 2 minutes, holding the sword, and I watched him through the sidelight window. He looked almost confused, as if the reality of what he'd done hadn't quite landed yet. Then I heard the sirens and I saw him look down at the sword in his hand, and I watched the color drain from his face. He turned and walked quickly back toward his house 3 doors down, katana swinging at his side, and I thought, too late, Karen. Way too late. 2 cruisers arrived within 4 minutes. Officers Daniela Ruiz and Marcus Webb took my statement on the porch. Alana was already outside, arms crossed, pointing at her Ring doorbell without being asked. Jake Tillman had his phone out and had recorded the last 60 seconds of the incident from across the street. Mrs. Kolsky, bless her, had called 911 independently as a second witness. Officer Ruiz watched the doorbell footage twice before saying anything. Ma'am, she said, this is a felony. Officer Webb was already walking down Birchwood Lane toward Karen's house. I sat on my porch step and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 18 months. Alana came and sat beside me. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand over mine. Renard Kellner was arrested at his front door at 4:47 p.m. On July 27th. He was charged with felony assault in the first degree under Ohio law, which carries up to 8 years in prison. His katana was bagged as evidence. The police report noted that Karen had been in his bathrobe, that he had crossed onto private property, and that he had swung a deadly weapon within striking distance of a resident. Booking photo, published the next morning in the Columbus Dispatch. I did not sleep much that night. Lily had been inside during the whole incident, watching cartoons, and I sat by her bed until she was deeply asleep before I let myself shake. My hands trembled for an hour. This was not the plan. This was not the endgame I had been building toward. I had imagined winning in a boardroom, not on a 911 call. And yet, and I would not fully understand this until later, Karen's explosion that afternoon had handed me something far more powerful than any legal filing could have. He had handed me the entire case, wrapped in video evidence, witnessed by 4 people on a public street. Patricia Nguyen called me at 7 a.m. the next morning. I had already emailed her the footage links. Mara, she said, I need you to understand something. This is no longer just an HOA dispute. I know, I said. This is now a criminal matter, a civil liability matter, and potentially a fair housing matter, depending on what we find in his enforcement records. I felt something sharpen inside me. What do you mean? Fair housing? Patricia was quiet for a moment. I've been going through the violation records you sent me. I want to run a comparison. Can you get me the full resident roster and the violation logs for the last 3 years? I could. I had already submitted a formal records request under Ohio's Planned Community Statute. Karen had stonewalled it. But now he was in police custody. The management company, Prestige Property Services, suddenly found itself very motivated to cooperate. Sandra from Prestige called me herself that afternoon. She sounded like someone who had just realized the ship she'd been on had been taking on water for years. "We'll have the records to your attorney by Friday," she said. They arrived Thursday. Patricia called me Friday morning. "Mara," she said, "I need you to sit down." I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold. In the past 3 years, Karen issued 147 violation notices in Sycamore Ridge. I've now mapped them by resident demographics using the census data for this zip code. She paused. 83% of all violations went to residents who are Black, Latino, or Asian. The 7 households receiving 0 violations in that period are all white, all personal acquaintances of Karen's. The room went very quiet. I thought about the Patels and their vegetable garden. I thought about Alana's azaleas. I thought about the Nguyen's on the back street who'd been fined for a bird bath. "That's a Fair Housing Act violation," I said. "That's a textbook Fair Housing Act violation," Patricia confirmed. "And it opens a federal door." She filed with HUD the following Monday. The news broke first on a local Columbus TV station, Channel 4. The 6 o'clock report, HOA president arrested for sword attack on resident. By midnight, the story had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By the following morning, it was on Reddit, Twitter/X, TikTok, and a YouTube commentary channel with 2.4 million subscribers who titled their segment, "He Pulled a Sword Over a Wreath?" My phone did not stop ringing for 4 days. I gave 2 interviews, carefully worded, and let the footage speak for itself. Here is where the first big twist landed. Karen's attorney, a man named Douglas Featherman who wore pocket squares and radiated the energy of someone who had never lost before, filed a countercomplaint with the HOA board. He argued that I had been deliberately provoking Karen for months by filing bad faith complaints and that the sword incident was an overreaction by a community leader under sustained harassment. I read the filing and almost choked on my own laughter. But what Featherman didn't know, what Karen didn't know, was that the HOA board he was appealing to had already received my coalition's formal petition to remove Karen from his position. Signed by 61 of Sycamore Ridge's 89 households. 61. We'd been collecting signatures quietly, door by door, for 3 months. The emergency board meeting was called for August 3rd. Prestige Property Services sent their regional director, a man named Gil Harmon who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Karen appeared in a suit, out on bail, flanked by Featherman. I appeared with Patricia, Alana, Tom Brandt, and 4 other residents. The community center folding chairs were full. People were standing along the walls. Someone had brought a casserole. Featherman opened by arguing that Karen's actions were protected by his role as board president enforcing community standards. Patricia let him finish, then stood up and laid 3 things on the table: the violation disparity analysis, the trespass footage from June, and the felony arrest record. She placed them in a neat row, like a hand of cards. Mr. Kellner violated the HOA's own notice requirements on at least 19 documented occasions, she said. He trespassed on private property. He wielded a deadly weapon against a resident. And his enforcement pattern constitutes a federal fair housing violation. She paused. We are not here to ask the board to remove him. We are here to inform the board that if they do not remove him, they become co-defendants in the federal civil rights action I am filing next week. Gil Harmon from Prestige looked like he'd bitten into a lemon. Featherman whispered something to Karen. Karen, for the first time in 18 months, said nothing. The board voted 3-0 to remove Renard Kellner as president and suspend his HOA membership pending the resolution of criminal charges. It took 11 minutes. Karen stood up when the vote was announced. He looked around the room, at me, at Alana, at Tom, at the 61 residents who had signed the petition, and his face did something complicated. He did not look angry. He looked genuinely shocked, as if this was the first time in his life the rules had applied to him. He walked out without a word. Featherman followed, briefcase banging against the door frame. The room erupted. Someone cheered. Someone else started crying. Alana grabbed my arm so hard it left a mark I didn't mind at all. But we were not done. Not even close. The criminal case moved forward. Karen's defense tried to argue, no intent to harm, that waving a ceremonial sword was simply an expressive gesture of authority. The prosecutor, Assistant D. Joanna Marsh, played the doorbell footage for the grand jury. It took them 40 minutes to indict. Ohio Revised Code 2903.11, felony assault, carries a mandatory prison term when a deadly weapon is used. A katana is a deadly weapon. There was no wiggle room. Featherman tried 3 motions to suppress the footage. All 3 were denied. Here is where the second big twist arrived, one I hadn't seen coming at all. 2 weeks before the criminal trial, a woman named Beverly Hatch contacted Patricia's office. Beverly was a former resident of Sycamore Ridge who had sold her house in 2021 after Karen's harassment became unbearable. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was what Beverly brought with her, a thumb drive. On that drive were emails, Karen's personal HOA email account, which Beverly's IT professional son had recovered from a server backup when Prestige had briefly and accidentally CC'd him on an administrative thread. Those emails showed Karen coordinating with 2 board members to fabricate violation notices against specific residents. Not misinterpret rules. Not overzealously enforce. Fabricate. Create violations that did not exist. Against residents he wanted out of the community. The Hendersons. The Patels. 3 other families I didn't know. Patricia turned the drive over to the DA's office and to HUD the same afternoon. The case was no longer just felony assault. It was now also wire fraud, fair housing discrimination and potential conspiracy charges. Karen's attorney filed to plea immediately. Featherman had suddenly lost his pocket square energy. But here is the thing about a case this visible. With this much footage and documentation, the DA did not want to plea. Joanna Marsh wanted to try it. And she did. The trial lasted 6 days. I testified on day 2. I wore a navy blazer and flat shoes. I sat in the witness box and answered every question calmly, factually and without embellishment. I described the sword swinging past my face. I described the sound. I did not perform grief or fear for the jury. I simply told them what happened, step by step, in the order it happened, exactly as I had logged it. Patricia had coached me, the facts are powerful enough. Let them do the work. The defense tried to suggest I had baited Karen by hanging a non-compliant wreath. Patricia had already established the wreath was 22 inches. Within guidelines. Featherman's best argument collapsed in cross-examination when Patricia produced the CCNR text and asked him to read the dimension limit aloud. 24 inches. He read and you could hear the air leave the room. Karen's own attorney had just confirmed the wreath was legal. The jury needed 3 hours. Guilty on felony assault. Guilty on 2 counts of harassment under Ohio's criminal menacing statute. The fabricated violation emails added 2 counts of attempted fraud. Sentencing was 31 days later. Judge Cora Simmons was not known for leniency in cases involving weapons and premeditated harassment patterns. She sentenced Karen to 4 years in state prison, with a ban on serving in any homeowners association, board, or community governance role for 15 years following release. She looked directly at Karen when she said, "You used the mechanisms of community governance as a weapon against your neighbors. The law does not protect that use." Karen stood very still. He did not look at me. The civil case settled 3 months later. Bejo, through Prestige Property Services insurer, paid out a settlement to 7 families, the Patels, the Hendersons, Alana, Tom Brandt, Beverly Hatch and 2 others, totaling a number I'm not allowed to disclose but that Alana described, with a very large smile, as enough to fix the roof and still take my sister to Cancun. The HUD investigation resulted in a formal consent order requiring Sycamore Ridge to implement anti-discrimination training and independent oversight of all violation notices for 5 years. Prestige Property Services terminated their contract with Sycamore Ridge, partly for liability reasons and partly, I suspect, because Sandra had gotten very tired of this entire situation. A new management company arrived with fresh eyes. A cleaner process and a policy requiring all board inspection notices to be delivered in writing, 72 hours in advance, per the CC and RS that had always required it. Tom Brandt was elected as the new HOA board president at the November annual meeting. He ran unopposed. His first act was to formally rescind every violation notice Karen had issued in the prior 36 months that could not be supported by independently documented evidence. 109 notices were thrown out. Alana's azaleas officially became grandfathered approved landscaping. Permanent status. But here is the part of this story that stays with me. The part that doesn't resolve cleanly into triumph. The night before Karen's sentencing, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, from something more complicated. I thought about the fact that this man had spent years, perhaps decades, building his entire identity around controlling this small patch of suburb. He genuinely believed, I think, that he was making the neighborhood better. That his rules, his order, his standards were the thing standing between Sycamore Ridge and chaos. He was wrong in every way that mattered. He was also profoundly alone. At the sentencing, his wife sat in the back row, not beside him. His adult son did not come. No neighbors appeared in support. There was no one to stand up and say that Renard Kellner had been a good man. I found that sadder than I expected to. The wreath, by the way, the sunflower wreath that started everything, is still on my front door. I replaced it with an identical one after the police took the original as evidence. 22 inches. Well within guidelines. Some mornings I look at it and feel something that is not quite victory. It is more like the feeling after a long hard run, exhausted, clear-headed and quietly aware of how much it cost to get here. Lily asked me once, a few months after everything, why Mr. Ken went away. I thought about how to answer. He broke the rules, I said. The real ones. She considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old who takes rules very seriously. Was he sad? She asked. I thought about him standing in that courtroom, looking at a room full of people he had wronged, with no one to stand beside him. I think so, I said. I think he was very sad. In a way he didn't know how to fix. She nodded like that made sense. Can we get a dog? She said. And I burst out laughing, which I needed more than I had known. Alana and I have coffee on her porch most Sunday mornings now. Tom Brandt waves from his driveway. The Kowalski couple's grandchildren have started visiting again. Their bikes scattered across the cul-de-sac on weekends like bright plastic flowers. Sycamore Ridge feels, genuinely, like the neighborhood it was advertised to be. I never forgot that it took a sword to get here. The thing about documentation, about the slow, deliberate work of building a case brick by careful brick, is that it feels unglamorous while you're doing it. Feels like nothing. Notes app entries at 11 p.m. Certified letters that get form letter responses. Saturday afternoons reading Ohio HOA statutes instead of watching movies. But every single one of those unglamorous moments was a load-bearing wall. Remove any one of them and the whole case folds. Karen was always going to overreach. People like him always do. My job was simply to be ready when he did. If you are living under an HOA Karen right now, if you are getting fined for your welcome mat or your azaleas or the color of your shutters, I want you to hear this. Document everything. Read your CC and RS. Know your state's HOA laws. Get a coalition. Find your Alana. Find your Tom. And hang your wreath. Because the rules, the real ones, are on your side, and a Karen armed with a binder and a petty agenda has no idea what is coming when someone decides to actually use them.